Hey, everybody. Welcome to Common Censored. I'm Lee Camp, joined by Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello.
This is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other stuff.
And this is the Defeating U.S. back Coup episode. Woo!
Dun, dun, dun.
Woo!
Dun, 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 dun.
All right. So, yeah, we're going to get to that in a moment, but let's do this day in history.
All right, kids, gather round because Auntie Eleanor is about to share with you what happened today in history. So I found this as I was scrolling, like you do when you're scrolling. Today, in 1948, the UN rejected the Russian proposal to destroy atomic weapons. And when it says UN, just really read US. So basically what happened is folks might be familiar with the fact that the U.S. is the only country to ever deploy atomic weapons.
On humans.
On humans. And
Us and many other countries have fucked up some aardvarks, though.
well, deployed, I guess I should say deployed them in war against an opponent.
Yep.
How about that? Because I'm sure we killed plenty of animals when we dropped those bombs.
That's my point. We
Okay.
fucked up some aardvarks.
I was
At the
unaware
moment-
of your specific affinity for aardvarks, but
Well, they were testing them out in like the Nevada desert and shit, Arizona desert and shit. At the moment the bomb was going off, I'm sure the aardvarks were thinking, or the armadillos and things were thinking, yeah, aardvarks down out there. I was thinking armadillos, but I'm sure they were thinking like, this seems like overkill, even if they don't like us. Why nuclear bombs?
which really says a lot about the armadillo's understanding of weapon technology.
You're underestimating them.
Clearly. So basically, after that happened, this kind of launched, so to speak,
After Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yes,
yeah.
the arms race. And in early 1946, the U.S. proposed the formation of the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission, which sounds good, right? And the point of the commission was to establish an international control over the spread and development of nuclear weapons and technology. That sounds great, right? The only problem is just like a lot of things like, like the right to work laws and things like that. It sounds good when it isn't. So this was put forward by a guy named Bernard Baruch, who was a trusted advisor and to U.S. presidents, plural. And he basically was totally anti-Russia, was terrified of them, the boogie man. And his proposal was basically announcing that the U.S. was going to maintain all of its nuclear weapons, but it wanted a monopoly. And so basically it was like, so we're going to keep all of our shit, but we want to make sure that every other country in the world has nothing, no programs, no, not even like, not even like the Catholic sin of thinking about a nuclear weapon, right? You have, but we're going to keep ours. So just shut up. Don't ask. Fuck you.
We have all the guns and nobody's allowed to have guns except us. We have all of them.
And so then the Soviet Union countered and was like, okay, that's some bullshit. We're rejecting that. But then they put up another plan that was basically a plan to ban all nuclear weapons on the entire planet. And then in 1948, on this day, the U.S. vis-a-vis the UN was like, no. And that was today in history.
Here we are, 30 seconds to midnight or whatever it is on the nuclear clock, meaning we are basically as close to nuclear annihilation as we've ever been. And here's probably one of the biggest untold stories of the Trump administration, because it doesn't fit with the talking points, is that Trump, who has been really adversarial to Russia, if you actually look at his actions. I know they love to go, oh, he's Putin's puppet. If you actually look at his actions of the Trump administration, very adversarial to Russia, far worse than Obama was, and has pulled out of multiple arms treaties that Russia was a big fan of. Things that limit nuclear weapons and stuff like that. But now normally, if you had an actual legitimate like left-wing party in America that was, getting any media time, then they would say, this is horrible, what a warmonger, he's going to cause nuclear Armageddon. He's going to get us killed. This is crazy. But instead, you just have the Democrats who are like, well, we've been acting like quietly that he's in Putin's pocket. And so if we talk about him pulling out of these arms deals, that's
makes us
actually
look bad.
That's actually against Russia.
Yeah.
And so it actually doesn't fit with the kind of false version of Trump we've created. So we're just not going to say anything about that.
We're gonna put that in our back pocket. Yeah, and so the next time that somebody says some claptrap bullshit about Russia's the aggressor, I mean there are a myriad of things that you can point to, i.e. that Russia doesn't have any military bases outside of its own country.
It does have 10, but they're all in former Soviet bloc countries.
I'm sorry. That's my bad. Is it China that doesn't have?
China,
no, China has like 1.
China
right?
has 1. Russia has 10, and I believe those might just be the only country. Well, Britain's obviously got some. The only
right, like the Falkland Islands or something.
Yeah, those might be the only countries that we're quote unquote enemies with that have any military bases outside.
Okay,
of
my bad.
borders.
Russia has 10. That's compared to 1,000. That's my bad. So the next time that somebody comes up to you with that bullshit that Russia's the aggressor, you can point out 10 is a smaller number than 1,000. You can also point out that Russia.
What if they argue with that?
Russia is not doing military exercises in Mexico or Canada the way that the U.S. is doing military exercises around Russia, including in Sweden, which is fucking stupid, and I'm very angry at Sweden for that, among other things, but that's a different tangent. Also, you can point out that there is a pretty rich history of Russia being like, hey, can we just not with the whole nuclear war thing? For instance, today in history, I feel like we need a little tune for that.
We do. Someone.
A little jingle.
You're the musician. Put your jingle hat on.
So today in history, October 21st, 1948, you can point out that the U.S. vis-a-vis the UN fucking kiboshed Russia's, then the Soviet Union's suggestion that we ban on all nuclear weapons. So
the more you know. Okay, I don't feel like we harmonized well.
No.
Okay, so
I was trying to find your pitch, but I don't know that.
I don't know that I had one. Wait, do you have to have a pitch? I don't have a pitch. All right, so for those of you listeners who have seen some of our other stuff, like our live stream last... we didn't. We actually didn't have the results as of the live stream last weekend, but I've done live streams on YouTube that you can watch about Bolivia has defeated the U.S.-backed coup from a year ago at the ballot box.
Dun, da, 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 da.
So I want to, but even if you've seen my video on this, I want to give more detail, more information, get deeper into it. And one thing I'd like to point out is, which I think I saw someone else say on Twitter, is that isn't it nice that Bolivia had the option to get rid of their oligarchs via the ballot box? We here in the U.S. don't seem to have that option. We have 2 corporate parties running the show. And so there really is no vote that's against the oligarchy, except for third parties that are, not allowed on every ballot, not allowed on the mainstream media, etc.
Yeah, there is no vote against U.S. imperialism in the ballot box.
So Bolivia was able to do something that we can't do. But okay, let's get into some of the details here. This is from the Glenn Greenwald's Intercept article. Glenn Greenwald, the Intercept has some problems sometimes, but Glenn Greenwald generally does great work. Headline, Bolivians return Evo Morales' party to power 1 year after a U.S. applauded coup. Now, some people have been hesitant to say U.S.-backed coup because it's not like we sent troops, but much of it was very applauded by us. Much of it was done by a seeming U.S. coup playbook. And there are some connections as to where some of these people trained and stuff, but it's not like our troops were on the ground. So
was this School of the Americas again?
I think they were somehow involved,
which is now called something else.
I think it's called Z. No, just kidding.
No, wait, that's Blackwater.
That's Blackwater. I'm just kidding. But they always change. I think it's called Fun Time for Kids. They always change it to something where you'll never know that it's what it does. But okay, so here, let's start with Glenn Greenwald's article. In November 2019, Bolivia's 3-term president, Evo Morales, was forced under threat of police and military violence to flee Mexico. So for those of you who think that it wasn't a coup, it was just an election that he lost, no. He was forced to flee to Mexico on the threat of violence. I'm going to continue reading. Just weeks after he was declared the winner of the October presidential election that would have sent him to a 4th term. Installed in his place was an unelected right-wing coup regime led by self-declared interim president Janine Áñez, who promptly presided over a military massacre that killed dozens of Morales' indigenous supporters and then granted immunity to all the soldiers involved. So yeah, this was basically a military coup with the far right wing. Well, let's see. I think.
By the way, it's WITSEC, the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation.
Oh, that's the new name of School of the Americas. Yeah. When you're accused of like just horrible crimes against humanity, if you just change your name, everyone's fine with it.
Which is totally what happens. Again, like you noted, Blackwater is now Z, or is it? It's now something else.
Now they're on to Academy, I believe.
Oh, for fuck's sake, spelled with an I.
Yes.
Fuck you, not you.
But so basically, Evo Morales, running for his 4th term last year, won. He still won the election. The argument was just whether he had won over 50% and would require a runoff. So that was the debate over, did he get 50%, did he not? And at that point, with the U.S. support, with the support of the U.S. media, which, by the way, is key in these in somewhere like Bolivia, because many people still in these other countries look to things like the New York Times and, believe it or not, CNN and stuff like that to see what's going on in the world. And so the New York Times, and in the print edition, you can't find this online, but I kept the print edition actually for months. They ran with the headline, "The End of Tyranny," when Evo Morales, the first elected indigenous leader of the country, had been kicked out.
Well, and I also, because Morales was president for 14 years, right?
12. He was going for more. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things, and this is also something to look for. I feel like I have my teacher hat on today. I don't know why, but like in terms of media literacy, like here's something also to look out for. The way that we talk about other countries as if they're also subject to our laws and legislation. So, for instance, in the United States, a president is in power for 4 years, right? And he can be voted in twice. And so the way that people were talking about Morales was that if he somehow had like ruled longer than he was allowed to, even though they don't have the same constitution as we do, stating that a president can only be in power for 8 years.
Right. He secured judicial permission to seek a 4th term, despite their former term limits provision. And so it's like, even if you criticize that, even if you are upset that he got that judicial permission, as Glenn Greenwald says, none of the criticisms changed a central, unavoidable fact. More Bolivians voted for Morales to be president in 2019 than any other candidate. And in a democracy, that's supposed to be decisive.
Right, and that's the point. So, and it's also important to note that it's not like he just sat down and he was like, I'm just going to stay. You can't fucking do it. I'm staying. Fuck you. Like, he went through channels to, and you can say whatever you want, but again, like, the bottom line being that he didn't just sit there and say he wasn't going to leave. He went through channels that were available based on his own country's constitution, which, by the way, was relatively recently just completely rewritten. So they have a new constitution that is based on the demands and the will of the people.
Now, hold on. Constitutions are forever.
Forever.
And they're always wonderful, right?
And unless they're written by dead white dudes, they don't count, okay? So
I prefer dead white slave owners, but I'll take just dudes.
True. Fair, because there were other white dudes that did not own humans at that time. So, yeah. So it's important to note that that when we're talking about any sort of president or the leader of a country, the way that the U.S. talks about these leaders and labels them dictators or what have you is oftentimes what they'll oftentimes try to do is they'll try to use our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, which, by the way, is the only Constitution in the Western and I believe in the industrialized world that has never been rewritten.
Right.
Yeah. So they'll oftentimes use that old ass fucking Constitution to dictate that this person is wrong in their country that is obviously not subject to our fucking old Constitution.
Well,
so that's another point to look at in terms of media literacy.
And similarly, something I'll get to in a minute is how our view of democracy seems to change depending on which country it is or which leader it is. But let me give a little more information. the Áñez regime, so this is a far-right regime. By the way, when they stormed into the Capitol building, they brought a giant Bible the size of, like a Mini Cooper into the building and held it up. There's this tiny religious far right wing faction that kicked Morales out of the country. The Áñez regime twice postponed the scheduled elections this year. Bolivians went, but eventually finally held it, and Bolivians went to the polls this past Sunday. They delivered a resounding victory to presidential candidate Luis Arce. Morales' former finance minister and the candidate from his movement towards socialism, or MAS party. Let's see. This is still Glenn Greenwald. It is difficult to remember the last time a U.S.-approved military coup in Latin America failed so spectacularly. Even with the U.S.-dominant OAS's instantly dubious claims of electoral fraud, nobody disputed that Morales received more votes in last October's election than all other candidates. Despite Morales' election win, the Bolivian police and then military made clear to Morales that neither he, his family, nor his closest allies would be safe unless he immediately left the country. And they actually dragged MAS mayors out of their homes and shaved their heads in the middle of town and threw paint on them. And all these violent tactics done to make people feel threatened and afraid.
And it's also important to recognize the indigenous aspect of this because Morales is indigenous and because so many members of the MAS party are also indigenous. A lot of the supporters are indigenous. So this is also a very heavily indigenous rights issue. And a lot of the people, Áñez is considered to be more white. She, if I remember correctly, she dyes her hair blonde. It's it's very similar to what happens in Venezuela, where people, when they talk about Maduro, they oftentimes draw him as an ape, and just super racist shit that really highlights this sort of perpetuation of a colonial mentality.
Yep.
You talking about the Bible versus in the old. The way that Morales had it in the presidential residence, there was an image of Pachamama, which is like Mother Earth. They pulled that down, and instead it was the Bible and Jesus and all of this colonialist bullshit, which is just further asserting the right of the colonial, imperialist, capitalist dictator.
And actually, if you take a photo of the opposition supporters in Venezuela, the ones that are pro-coup, the ones that meet with Americans and are funded by Americans, if you take a photo of that group and you hold it up next to a photo of Maduro and his administration and, the former Chavez administration, there's a clear skin color difference. The Maduro side is darker skin color because they are, come from indigenous people, and the Juan Guaido side is much lighter skinned. Juan Guaido is a bit of an exception, and he was picked for that reason because his skin is slightly darker.
But Juan Guaido famously does not like to be called Venezuelan. He calls himself Spanish.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and a lot of those opposition people claim that they're not. Oh, we're not, of Venezuelan descent. We're Spanish. So, not even trying to fucking sugarcoat that shit.
Well, Guaido did go to Georgetown for schooling and trained under economist and former oil executive. I can't remember his name, but that was his kind of mentor at Georgetown. Let's see. Okay, so continuing with the Glenn Greenwald article, there is no question that Morales' presidency, by almost every metric, was a success. After decades of instability in the country, he ushered in a stable and thriving democracy, presided over economic growth, which Greenwald links to a New York Times article saying there was economic stability and growth, that even Western financial institutions praised, and worked to ensure a far more equitable distribution of those resources than ever before, particularly to the country's long oppressed indigenous minority and its rural farmers. That success is what was destroyed on purpose when the Bolivian presidency was decided in 2019, not democratically, but by force. And we can't overstate how celebratory our U.S. oligarchy was when this coup happened. Mm-hmm. I mean, you not just had Pompeo and Trump and everything celebrating that this shows democracy is great when the coup happened, but you have Joe Biden and others talking about how wonderful what was going on in Bolivia was. Of course, Elon Musk. We can get to the lithium in a moment if you'd like. But this is what, I'm jumping the gun because this is what Glenn Greenwald is about to say. The West's reaction to the 2019 Bolivian coup featured all of its classic propaganda tropes. Western officials, media outlets, and think tank writers invoked the Orwellian inversion of heralding a coup of any democratically elected leader they do not like as victory for democracy. In this warped formula, it is not the U.S.-supported coup plotters, but the overthrown, democratically elected leader who is the threat to democracy.
Right, and I always, and here's another point, like, notice how they talk about Morales and how they talk about Maduro, but Macron, who, by the way, one of our listeners, Nicholas, who lives in Paris, sent me information and video showing that the yellow vests are still out and still protesting. So Macron, who's been protested basically since he fucking slithered his way into office, the U.S. media always talks about him like, oh, President Macron. Meanwhile, you got Maduro, who they just have big fucking parades for him, and a huge part of that is, of course, because they want to make it clear to the U.S. and to the other countries that no, we actually want this guy. So you've got one guy who's consistently battered by his constituents, which is Macron, versus someone like Maduro. And then Maduro's the dictator and Macron is the president. And yet they are both technically in the office of president.
Right.
But that's how they're discussed. So a lot of people, this was actually an interesting point that someone made on Twitter. They're like, I think a lot of people don't even realize that Maduro is a president. They think that he is some sort of...
They think there aren't elections.
Right. Because that's never even fucking mentioned. The only time elections are mentioned, for instance, with Venezuela back in 2018, was, oh, the election's a farce. It was a fucking mess. Meanwhile, international election observers were like, no, this is actually pretty good. Maybe the U.S. could learn something here. Shut up.
Well, and even the people that, let's say the opposition voters, people who like the opposition, who live in Venezuela and don't like Maduro. So these are anti-Maduro people in Venezuela. Even they are like, yeah, the opposition is a shit show. It's a bunch of fucking idiots acting like they all represent the opposition and they don't get together. And so even though I'm impersonating them, even though I hate Maduro, blah, 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 the opposition wouldn't win these elections because they don't have any support, general support.
And they don't have anything to come with. I mean, this is why, you mentioned some of the things that happened under the Mas Party, where even the United States was forced to say, hey, that's pretty good economic policy. People actually being lifted out of poverty, people actually having access to basic human rights and everyday needs. What is the opposition going to say? Actually, we'd rather you not eat, or we'd rather you not have shelter. It's there's not much to come with in these moments, because the opposition party is basically just saying hey, we like the U.S. and we fucking fucking up our own country for the sake of Wall Street. Does that sound good to anybody? Hello?
Right.
Cricket.
Right. So to go back to us calling, Evo Morales anti-democratic, This is Greenwald says, depicting U.S.-supported coups as democratic and democratically elected leaders disliked by the U.S. as dictators has been a staple of U.S. foreign policy propaganda for decades. That is the rubric under which the Obama administration and Secretary of State John Kerry somehow celebrated one of the world's worst despots, Egyptian General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, as restoring democracy following the brutal military coup he carried out. So yeah, this is nothing new, and this shows that our two parties agree on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And as kind of, this is one of those, when I heard about this, I was like, oh, I'm kind of jealous. Because
that they get to vote for something real.
Well, because again, like the opposition party doesn't have much to come with. It's like we only have that opposition party in the United States. We only have two parties. Like, we want to fuck some shit up for Wall Street. How does that sound? Anybody? Like, who's with us? Da, da, da. But like, there was an actual choice in Bolivia, and it kind of made me think. Because I couldn't help but do like a little bit of a comparative analysis. I couldn't help but think, like, what would our elections look like, or an attempt to an election, if we actually had a party like that? And I'm not talking about somebody like Sanders, because again, Sanders is not really left. He's like a progressive Democrat.
He's left of the Democrats, but he's not a leftist.
But again, the Democrats are so far right now that like most everyone is left of Democrats. But I'm talking about like an actual party like Mas that believes in protecting the environment, believes in indigenous rights, believes in, therefore basic human rights, believes that everyone should have their basic needs met. If there was like an actual party like that, and people, I think, would, particularly younger folks, would be desperate to vote, right? Like, oh my God, finally, like something I believe in. What would our elections look like, and what would the opposition to those elections, I mean, like the actual physical force, look like? I know there were some issues with people being able to access voting in Bolivia too, because the military and what was it, the U.S. approved violent militias and things like that were trying to stop people from voting because it was so clear that Mas would win by such a landslide. And I was just kind of thinking about, like, what would that look like here, while also being really jealous that they actually had that option.
Right, that they even had the choice. So here's the last part I'll read from Greenwald's article, and I think this has obvious analogous situations to the U.S. He says, but thanks to Sunday's stunning rebuke in Bolivia, the standard tactics have failed. Ever since Morales' election victory a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, Bolivians never stopped marching, protesting, risking their liberty and their lives, even in the middle of a pandemic, to demand their rights of democracy and self-governance. Leading up to this election, the coup regime and right-wing factions in the military were menacingly vowing that they would do anything to prevent the return to power of Morales' party.
Right, and I think there was also, I mean, the elections were postponed, right?
Multiple times. Yep.
So
because they saw the polls.
Right.
Yep.
So this is, again, like, this is really an important thing to note, that the power, great that they've had that option of the Mas party, but they didn't have that option because the powers that be were like, we think you should have an option that's actually for human rights.
Yeah.
That option has only ever existed, not just in Bolivia, but anywhere. That option has only ever existed because people have pushed desperately for that option. And I think that, while I'm jealous of that there, I recognize that the United States is a different place entirely. And I don't want to get off on like the electoral politics tangent too much, but I do not think that our power lies in fighting for a party like Mas. I think that our power lies in fighting for the demands that are part of, like a Mas party, but not working so hard on necessarily building that party, but working hard on making it politically untenable to ignore the demands and the rights of the people here.
And something else that is not in Greenwald's article is the important role that exit polls played in all of this. The exit polls are widely viewed as legitimate in that country. And after the polls closed, the ballot places, the ballot areas that were collecting ballots closed. You saw exit polls on Bolivian television, mainstream media, showing that Mas had won a resounding victory. Now, the ballots were still being counted, but this meant that you couldn't just come out, the government couldn't just come out and say, oh, well, we counted the ballots and we won really easily. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, guys.
They couldn't do that because the exit polls were too clear that, even if the exit polls were off by a couple of percentage points, they weren't going to be off by some crazy amount. And in the U.S., because our system is so rigged, depending on which area you're in, which city you're in, whether it's the primaries, whether it's the general, the number of people that have been suppressed, thrown off the rolls, interstate cross-check, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because of all those things, our exit polls are often not matching up with the machine results.
Which is why we don't do them anymore.
And so now we're getting close to abandoning all exit polls. Even as of the last election, 2016, the only remaining exit poll firm is called Edison Research. They did all of America's exit polling, and even they said that they matched the machine, made the machine results match with the exit polling, which is the opposite of exit polling.
Right. That's not an exit poll.
That's not an exit poll. But in order for them to do that, they had to wait for the machine results to come out, which means, so let's say Virginia says, okay, 8 p.m. polls close. At 8 p.m., they would release exit polls that were not matched with the machine results because they didn't yet have the machine results. Then they'd get the machine results and alter theirs to fit the machine results. But luckily, there was still that window. Sometimes it was a half hour. Sometimes it was an hour window where you could get the legitimate exit polls that had not been matched to the machines. And they showed a lot of problems. And so because the U.S., our ruling elite realized this is bad, or we're not matching up with the exit polls, now several of the media organizations, which are the ones that fund Edison Research, have pulled out their backing. So Associated Press, which, by the way, is a big pro-coup organization, right. AP is one of the first and often the loudest, saying like, oh, a coup in Bolivia was legitimate, or this latest democracy was, election was not legitimate. Anyway, the AP pulled out their support of Edison Research, claiming they were going to do their own exit polls. Fox News said they were going to do their own exit polls. So now you've got this, yes, you've got more people doing exit polls, but they're going to be from garbage like Fox News, propaganda outlets doing exit polls. And so I can't stress this enough. In other countries, exit polls are done well, and they are legit. And if the election is more than 2 points or even up to 4 points off from the exit polls, then it's fraudulent. In the U.S., we act like, oh, whoops, those exit polls don't matter. They must have got it wrong.
Right. In the U.S., we're like, we don't like those exit polls, so we're just going to stop using them.
Meh. Those don't meh.
Well, and the important thing, too, is, like, so there's a lot of, like, if we actually had an adversarial press that, like the First Amendment dictates we should, if we actually had a press that was like, well, we don't want to just be, as you put it, lead the stenographers of the State Department, we want to push back against empire, then I would feel better about media having their own exit polls. I'd be like, oh, cool, maybe we'd actually get a little bit of information. You'd have to, of course, still look at them and see what kind of parameters they use, but since the corporate media in the US is basically just the fucking voice of the empire, them doing exit polls is like, why bother? It's like, oh, our exit polls found that the people that pay our bills said that they're right.
It's like Donald Trump Jr. coming out with his exit polls.
Right.
You're like,
right.
What am I supposed to get out of this?
What the fuck? I can't even wipe my ass with this.
Do you want a last thing on Bolivia? Do you want to tell this Luis Arce story?
I'm all for telling stories these days. I
didn't mean like a tale. Do you want to weave this Luis Arce
Once
yarn?
Once again, gather round. Story time. No. This is true. Actually, all of it's true. The 1948 thing is true, too.
You've said two true things so far.
So this is a story that I got from Popular Resistance, called "America Has No Allies, Only Hostages." Too true. So this is another point that is important to note when we're talking about why the U.S. does and backs these sort of coups and backs the quote unquote opposition, is because Luis Arce explained that soon after being elected that he plans on reopening relations with Cuba, Iran, and Venezuela, and is happy to sit down with China and Russia too. And I can just see like people on K Street here in the U.S. and like people in Congress just having like minor like little strokes
Yeah.
as soon as they read that. And that the article points
They're
out
going to be talking to people?
like they're going to be talking to Iran. Arce expressed a willingness to, quote, open the door to all countries. The only requirement is that they respect us and respect our sovereignty, nothing more. All countries, no matter the size, who want a relationship with Bolivia, the only requirement is that we respect each other as equals. If that is so, we have no problem. What a fucking beautiful thing to say. I mean, you lovely human, you. Like, what
Was that
could
was
you imagine a head of state being like, or the head of the U.S. being like, no, we just want to sit down as equals? Like, my head would explode out of
Hold on,
sheer surprise.
I thought that was a Donald Trump quote, no? Okay, some quick notes before we get to the next story. Please, if you feel like you're getting $1 of content from our show each week or
Which
more,
you know you are.
go over to patreon.com/commoncensored. Keep the show rolling. We have no ads, no sponsors other than you. We know these are tough times, so I get why some people have canceled their Patreon tier membership, but it would, if for those of you that are not struggling, obviously if you're struggling, please do not give. But if you're struggling, if you aren't struggling, go over to patreon.com/commoncensored.
Give what you can, basically.
Give what you can and keep the show rolling. Okay, one other note. Well, two other notes. Eleanor's movie, you might have seen her featured on the Jimmy Dore show recently to talk about hardroadofhope.com. The awards and honors keep rolling in. Please, everybody, check out this important documentary. It's such a great cause in terms of learning about the people of West Virginia and the fights of the workers there, but it's just very informative and it really speaks to all of America as well.
Shucks.
hardroadofhope.com. And last thing I want to say before we get to the next story is my YouTube channel, Redacted Tonight, has been suppressed into oblivion. It's almost dead. It's on life support in a gutter on the side of the road. If you think you're a member, subscribed for free, obviously, at youtube.com/redacted tonight. You may be, but you are not being shown the videos usually, and if you are, they're not then recommending another Redacted Tonight video. They're trying to send you off to other things. So I'm not being recommended to anybody. Anyway, I'm not trying to create a sob story. I'm just saying that is the reason, because this channel is just about done, that I have created a new YouTube channel, and many of you don't know that you're not members or subscribed to the new YouTube channel. It is free, but I would love it if you would take 2 seconds, just go over to youtube.com/momentofclarity, click subscribe, click the little bell icon. That's all you got to do to join my new channel, which is less suppressed. I think it will remain that way for a while. And I'd really love to have you guys subscribe over there. I've started putting out a new series called Point Being, and it is slightly different than Moment of Clarity. Moment of Clarity is me just going through breaking news, but Point Being is more written rants, and so I'd love for you to head on over there. Okay,
Indeed.
So let's get to at least one more story here. What would you like? What you feeling?
Well, since we're on the Indigenous tip, I wanted to share this information The Indigenous Women Leaders have warned global financial companies to stop support for tar sands oil. So coming up, people might be, hearing about, so you might be seeing, like, if you scroll through Instagram or Twitter, like, oh, there's some mutterings happening about this pipeline or that pipeline. Some key financial, which, by the way, this is something that has not stopped or slowed down due to COVID. The dirty energy industry. Why is that so hard to say? The dirty energy industry has been going full force. Is still, heavily subsidized by the government, not just of the United States, but of Canada too. And that's important just because a lot of these pipeline projects deal with, for instance, the tar sands fields. I don't know what's going on with me. The tar sand fields in Alberta, Canada, for instance. So it's important that we recognize that there's a lot of cross collaboration between our government and that of Canada.
Oh, yeah. Because corporations don't see nations.
Exactly. They don't need passports to fuck up the climate. So Indigenous women leaders have come together to basically write an open letter to financial institutions, in particular those behind the Keystone XL, Line 3, and the Trans Mountain pipelines, because there are big financial decisions looming for these three projects in particular. And these projects will cover hundreds of miles and basically definitely result in extreme climate destruction, not to mention human rights abuses that we see with all of these dirty energy projects, increased cases of cancer, the fact that people can't live on their land anymore, in particular Indigenous peoples, Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities are always the first on the chop block in these quote unquote sacrifice zones that we saw this, for instance, quite clearly with the Dakota Access Pipeline. It was supposed to go rather close to Bismarck, North Dakota, but then they realized that, oh shit, Bismarck is predominantly white. We can't put it there. So they were like, oh, there's some indigenous people over there. Let's just fucking put it through their land.
Right. And it's not just from like a ha-ha fuck indigenous viewpoint. They do that because they know they have less political power.
Right.
They know that they're going to get far less pushback from actual politicians who have, a role in the state Senate or the state, legislature. And so if they go through an indigenous land or often a Black or Brown community, they know that there's not a lot of power there politically that can actually risk these projects.
Right, absolutely. And from that perspective, it is kind of ha-ha fuck Indigenous people because they have less political power by design, of course.
Right.
So Indigenous women leaders basically wrote an open letter that said that, the importance of not financially backing these projects, and couched within the letter is a clear point that, like, hey, we're watching you. And, we know our tactics have, and they don't expressly say this, but in my reading, it felt very clear that there was like, hey, we want to make the point in an open letter that sounds, very like sort of calm and collected, that you shouldn't back these projects, but know that these Indigenous women leaders have thousands of people behind them and that are willing to fight to protect the land, air, and water and the people that will be oppressed by these projects. So this is basically, again, it's TC Energy's Keystone XL pipeline, Enbridge Line 3, and the Trans Mountain pipeline, which is predominantly the Canadian government's pipeline. And the open letter basically demands that these institutions cut ties with all tar sands projects and companies. And the letter outlines the many risks and impacts that the fossil fuel industry, specifically tar sands, has caused in Indigenous communities, not least of all rural Indigenous communities that are put at a higher risk, not just for COVID in these times, but increased sexual violence and trafficking. If folks are familiar with man camps, the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls is a big issue that is directly linked to the propagation of fossil fuel projects around the U.S. and Canada.
I feel like the term man caves is going to ruin man caves for people because it's going to sound like there's like sexual assault going on in the man cave.
To be honest, man caves are like so gross.
Oh, I mean, they're lame. They're silly and lame.
Right.
To me, a lot of them are kind of juvenile. I suppose it depends on what you put in there, but I just think like someone could have a man cave, and it doesn't mean they're sexually trafficking.
No, I know,
women.
I know. I'm just saying if we got, I'm saying if we also got rid of man caves, I think that the world would also be a better place. And to circle back to the financial issue, and this is something that that you can share with people who don't have a soul, who only care about the
all
economic.
your soulless friends,
right? All the soulless people that you know that like totally lack empathy and their eyes are dead and everything. You can share this point with them that this spring, the tar sands industry, along with a lot of other fossil fuel industries, hit an all-time low, producing barrels of oil at a loss.
Woohoo!
So this is a particular important point for
Exxon was dropped from the Dow Jones.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
This is a point to really highlight in terms of the fact, like literally these industries would not be operating at all if it weren't for the fact that the governments of the United States and Canada and others subsidize them to the tunes of billions of dollars, and don't subsidize renewables at all, and if they do, it's very, very small. So this is another point that's highlighted in this open letter, but also something that's important to bring up, that even if you just care about the economy and you are completely soulless, it's also just not a good idea that there either. So folks can read the open letter. It was put out by the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. We can, and folks can look that up online if you'd like to share it or read it.
And can I just squeeze this COVID story in here? I feel like it's important. So people are still running around with these, a lot of idiocy is running rampant on COVID-19, and there's a lot of shock doctrine definitely going on. There are the oligarchs, the ruling elite will use a pandemic just like they'll use natural disasters to achieve their aims, such as giving $4.25 trillion to Wall Street, et cetera, but that doesn't change the fact that this pandemic is real and it's killing a lot of people. More and more people know someone who has either gotten very ill or died from it. I know I do, and I think that a lot of people out there are starting to realize that they're somehow connected to someone. But this latest story, which you found, thank you for finding it, 300,000 excess deaths this year suggests the COVID death rate is higher than reported. Mm-hmm. Now, excess deaths has always sounded like a funny term to me. It sounds like
we were expecting
is any death one we were rooting for? Like it sounds like, oh, that's too many. Oh, that's excess deaths. Come on, kill a few, but 300,000 is excess. It's too much. But anyway, it's always sounded like a funny term to me. But it actually has a academic meaning.
Right.
They're talking about, statistically speaking, they know that in America, with this many people and judging by past years, this is roughly how many people will die every year. If you add up everything, if you add up car accidents and heart attacks and all of the stuff, and number of people whose heads explode while they're watching,
spontaneous combustion.
Fucking Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC or Sean Hannity, and they just bleed out their ears. All of that is added up, and they have a rough estimate. I mean, rough, but it's within a couple of percentage points. It's going to be within 10 or max 20,000, people of how many are going to die. And they now know that this year so far, there has been 300,000 excess deaths than a normal year. Now, we know that the number of people they say have died from COVID-19 is 200, something like 220 or something. Maybe you can look it up. But it is not 300,000. It's 200 and something. We'll have the number in a moment. But 300,000 is more than the number we are told have died from COVID-19. So this number means that it is likely that far more people are dying from COVID-19 than we actually designate that. And this makes sense because many are, we've talked about this before on the show, many people are getting blood clots, they're dying from heart attacks or brain, aneurysms or what have you, and they die at home, or they maybe even go to a hospital, but they don't seem to have COVID symptoms, but many of them die at home. And I heard an interview with a New York firefighter, and most of the interview was about how tough it is to be a EMT right now with fewer people on the job because people were getting sick. But one of the things she mentioned is that we're dealing with 5 times the number of heart attacks than we've normally dealt with this time of year. And ever since then, I was like, oh, more people are dying from this than we're being told.
Right. And yes, to your point, it's more than 200,000 people at this point who have died of COVID. So
I think it's like 220.
Right. But that's the thing. It's like there's that's an extra 100,000, or let's say to be 80,000. There's an extra 80,000 people, and again, to your point, Lee,
221,000.
To your point, that's that's people that we know of, that 220,000 people. That's people that we know definitely died of COVID. And just another point here is that the U.S. is not testing people to the extent that other nations are testing people. And you certainly don't, not testing people once they die, if they die of something that doesn't seem to be related to COVID. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, everybody be safe. When you're around people, wear masks. Don't go to restaurants. But hope you're doing okay, though. Obviously, I don't like seeing people suffer in all the other ways that people are suffering, such as losing jobs and being stuck at home and not seeing other human beings. All of that is rough as well, and I certainly understand that. But there are other ways to deal with this pandemic. Many countries are doing it. They're getting through it better. They're getting through it with community and helping each other, and we could be doing that. So maybe U.S. is learning a terrible lesson right now. Okay, we are headed over to patreon.com/commoncensored to do 10 to 15 extra minutes for all the members over there. We'd love for you to join us. Patreon.com/commoncensored. Also, my new series, my new web series called Point Being, there's 2 episodes already up, is at youtube.com/momentofclarity. Please click subscribe. You can also get them all at leecamp.com. And check out Eleanor's movie, hardroadofhope.com, and all of Eleanor's work at artkillingapathy.com. Anything else?
I think you got it.
Keep fighting.
Act out.